Glenn Coffey still, we talked about him last week. Long week last week for him. Long week again this week. The state Democratic chairman, Ivan Holmes, brought up some of his campaign expense reports, thought they were a little vague, thought they were excessive. How is the speaker, or I'm sorry, the Senate leader, how is he weathering all this?
Well, you know, it's been a bad week, as you say. His wife's car got vandalized. To top things off, somebody smashed a window in the car. So it's been kind of not the best of weeks, but he's still has a lot of support in the Senate. This is an issue that Ivan Holmes, the Democratic chairman, as you mentioned, has questioned the expenses that he has spent for traveling from his campaign funds, and the question it's rounded off. He doesn't see any, you know,
there's nothing, no change, 118.45. Right. It's all double zeros, right?
And Coffey's office has said basically in 2008 he did travel across the country quite a bit trying to get support for Republican senatorial candidates.
Right.
And of course, they did take over the Senate for the first time in state history in November.
Right.
Now, what Holmes has said is that he's challenged the Senate President Pro Tem Coffey to turn his receipts over to the Ethics Commission.
Right.
And
itemized, yeah.
Itemized receipts, turn them over to the Ethics Commission, which they can do. Any candidate can do at any time if they want to add more information. But at the Ethics Commission, as you know, it's easy now for someone to say this should be investigated.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone files a request for investigation, or the Ethics Commission decides on its own to investigate, all that information becomes confidential and secret. So if Coffey, if this investigation was open and turned it over, we would never know.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, you know, you demand for an investigation to an agency. It seems rather simple, turn it over, and but Coffey's people say they're not going to turn it over. They comply with the law, and let's move on.
Well, and as you said, he's got strong support, certainly in his caucus. We've had comments in the paper from fellow senators that, hey, he's doing a good job, he's our guy. So it doesn't seem like there's any real, that heat hasn't ramped up to the point where you know, he'll need to step aside as leader.
No, I don't think that'll happen. And Coffey's office is saying, you know, he paid it out of campaign expenses, which is these travel expenses for seeking campaign donations. He could have charged the state because he is a state official. So they're saying, what do you want? Do you want the state to pay for it or the campaign? In the ideal world, we'd like for people to abide with the law and do both things properly. You know, if you're going to use campaign funds, then maybe, you know, use the accurate figures in your reports.
Sure. One other item that was interesting this week, there was a news conference held regarding Health Choice, which is a insurance provider for state employees. There has been a backup in getting claims turned back around, payments made to doctors and to the folks who need this, who use this insurance. Quite a backlog, and it's causing headaches not only for the folks who are insured, but for the doctors who need to get their reimbursement for the services rendered. What's going to happen with that? Is that just a matter of the computer glitches and the folks who are handling all this, getting all their issues solved and just moving down the road, or will there be any kind of changes made in how this is done, do you think?
Well, I think immediately they need to get the situation resolved, and that's where all the energy is being placed right now.
Right.
Because, like I mentioned, there are 6 months, or some cases, a whole year, more than a year backlog. But
by the way, you still owe me that $5 I lent you a couple of weeks ago, but we'll talk about that later.
Exactly. You know, getting blood out of a turnip. But this is a very serious problem for people, especially the employees who pay their benefits. And Health Choice, in some cases, it's the private firm that they hired to process the claim.
Right.
In 2007, the firm that they used for 16 years, they didn't award a renewal of that bid because of some changes they said in the company, and awarded it to a new company called EDS, which is a pretty big sized national company. Probably, you know, in hindsight, you can always look back and look at things you should have done better. It was when they didn't run similar programs, when they had a changeover, and anyone who's dealt with computers would know about this, that if you change over a whole data from one data system to another, you'd like to have the new system running at the same time parallel with the old system for at least 6 months to make sure all the bugs are out of the system. They didn't do that because they said that would be having contracts with both companies, and EDS said they could handle it with no problem. Well, they're supposed to take over January 1st of this year. The first claims weren't processed until January 29th, so immediately they got behind a month.
Sure.
And on top of that, the previous claims from 2008 their computers could read. So they had to go through manually and go through these claims. And you know how health claims are, they're very complicated. And so you have to make sure everything matches, and you're doing it manually.
So it's a mess.
It's a mess. It's a backlog. Like you say, providers from medical equipment suppliers to dentists to doctors haven't been paid.
Right.
And so what happens now, if you don't get paid and the same person comes up,
and they have health choice.
And health choice is sort of like, well, you know, the red flag comes up, and they say,
you want to deal with that, right?
You either have to pay in advance. We had a story about a woman who got a medical supply regularly and was told, okay, instead of paying half up front for that particular item, you now have to pay all of it.
Right.
And she said her cancer doctor even said, you know, as long as you have health choice, until this situation is resolved, you may have to
do more of that.
Do something, you know, change your treatment. You know, maybe you have to find another doctor or pay up front for your treatment. And those are the thousands of dollars for, you know, chemotherapy and such.
Well, it's an ugly situation, and that often happens at the Capitol this time of year. Things get wild and hairy. Well, we ask you to continue reading about these stories every day. Mike McNutt writes about them every day in the Oklahoman, and you can see them here on News OK TV.